A ger toshav we see in the Torah. A ger toshav is a non-Jew who lives among the Jews. He doesn't want to convert to Judaism, but he accepts, Judaism, and he accepts Sheva mitzvot, believes in a God. He lives a righteous, ethical life. It says in the Torah, if you have non-kosher meat, what do you do with the non-kosher meat? So you could give it to a ger toshav to eat, or you could sell it to a Gentile, right? So already see this category of ger toshav and other Gentile in the Torah. One you should sell to, one you should give gifts to. Actually, there's a rabbi who believes that the mitzvah of loving a ger toshav, a resident stranger who's not Jewish in Israel, is greater than the mitzvah to love a Jew. Why? Because to a Jew, you have to give tzedakah, you have to help them out. But if you've got meat, you should sell it to them. You shouldn't give them for free, right? But with a ger toshav, you have to give it to them for free. It's a mitzvah to give it to them for free. So we should love a non-Jewish immigrant in Israel more than we should love a Jew. So who's included in this ger toshav category that can live in Israel? You could sell them land in Israel. Who's included in this? So Talmud says, someone that has to accept in front of three people, in front of three chaverim, like a bet din, right? He has to accept upon himself either not to serve avodah zarah, all the mitzvot besides for not eating kosher meat, because Torah says he can eat not kosher meat, or the 7 Noahide laws. And most rabbis follow that middle opinion. He has to accept the 7 Noahide laws. So any non-Jew that accepts 7 Noahide laws, any good, righteous non-Jew, is a ger toshav. But no, first of all, he has to accept it upon himself in front of a bet din of three people. Second of all, there's a Talmud in Erchin that says that these laws only apply when the Yovel, when the Jubilee applies. So today we don't have the Jubilee, these laws don't apply anymore. And today we don't accept the ger toshavs anymore. So this kind of a resident stranger we don't accept today because we don't have the Jubilee anymore. And that's essentially the problem we're confronted with. Now, to be a righteous non-Jew, you don't need to accept the laws. But the ideal would be if we could make all non-Jews today into a resident stranger. And again, the essential problem here is, first of all, they've never accepted it upon themselves in front of three people. Second of all, these laws don't apply when the Jubilee doesn't apply. That's essentially my introduction to the class. In the Rambam, where this law comes up originally, it comes up in different contexts. And all three places Rambam writes, however, we don't accept ger toshavs anymore today. On the Rambam, we had the Ra'avad, who was also a very great rabbi at the time, and he often argued with the Rambam. Now here, he writes a comment on the Rambam, and he writes that I agree with him. The Talmud does say we only accept a ger toshav when the Jubilee applies, but where I don't agree with him is he didn't explain what that means. So he tells you, I'll tell you what that means. What that means is there are certain laws that apply to a ger toshav, such as living in Israel. Right? Or such as giving him, it's a mitzvah to feed him food, even for free, right? So he says those only apply when the Jubilee exists. Why? Because these laws the Jubilee is when most of the Jews around the world are in Israel. There's discussion whether or not that's going to return soon, because of all the aliyot, it might be that soon most Jews are going to be in Israel. We're actually pretty close now, we're a few percent off. So if that changes, it might be that the Jubilee, it's a disagreement whether or not the Jubilee will return. But the point is, when the Jubilee is when the most Jews around the world are in Israel. So when all the Jews are in Israel, we have our own independent, powerful state, and therefore we can choose who lives among us, who doesn't live among us. When we're a weak state, or we don't have our own state, then whoever wants to live in Israel can live in Israel. So today, non-Jews can live in Israel, Jews can live in Israel. We don't have a state. This law of who can we let live in Israel is only when we have a powerful, strong state. Similarly, feeding them refers to laws such as you've got a field. You've got a lot of crop in your field. A certain percent of your field goes to poor people. So it goes to poor people and to a ger toshav, right? So, but when we don't have fields, we don't have crops, we don't have these laws, then also you don't have to feed a ger toshav because you don't have the laws implemented there to feed them. But in principle, a ger toshav could still exist. It's just that when you don't have the Jubilee, the laws pertaining to a ger toshav don't apply. And because the laws pertaining to ger toshav don't apply, we also don't accept ger toshavs. So you don't have a bet din to accept ger toshavs, right? Now, a ger toshav, to some degree, becomes like Jewish, right? So it's some sort of a conversion. It is some sort of a conversion. It's a conversion regarding the 7 Noahide laws. He doesn't become Jewish, but it is a conversion to some degree, to the extent that according to some people, he might even have to keep Shabbos. And there's a lot of opinions as to what a ger toshav is obligated in, what he's not obligated in. Basically, we've got a perfect egalitarian religion, as long as we can accept that they are a ger toshav. And again, the only obstacle is that we don't accept the ger toshavs because you don't have the Jubilee. You could be a ger toshav, as mentioned earlier, the Ravad explains that someone could become a ger toshav. It's just that, well, that we don't accept it when there's no jubilee because all the laws don't apply anymore, right? We don't have land to give them. We don't have the power to let people in and not let people out. Based on the Beit Yosef and the Taz, where this heter mechira issue, selling land in Israel to avoid the 7th year of working, came about, the controversy arose, and major people in that controversy, one of the people who opposed this idea was the Netziv of Bilashan. He raised the possibility that maybe the Muslims in Israel are not ger toshavs. And then he pushed off this possibility. Rav Kook was a student of his. Interestingly, I don't know if this is actually accurate, but this is what they say in the yeshivot. Rav Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of, at the time, Palestine. Later, his students became the first chief rabbi of after Israel was established, so the modern state of Israel. So Rav Kook was from Lithuania, and he was in the yeshiva in Netziv, in Vilazhin. And the Netziv was the teacher there. And at the time, there were two teachers. There was the Netziv of Vilazhin, who was like the older scholar, and there was the young, cool rabbi, Reb Chaim Brisker, who was also a rabbi at the time. And everyone, he was much more popular in the yeshiva.
Great name.
Well,
It's a great name.
Rabbi Chaim.
Yeah.
he was a lot more popular in the yeshiva. People liked his style of learning. He was no, not as popular, but it's a competition. Now, some people went to
circles. In some circles, he's extreme.
They both lectured, and some people went to both, and some people only went to Rabbi Chaim's lectures. There was only one exception to this rule, which was Rav Kook. Rav Kook originally didn't go to anyone's class. The rationale being, why should I be listening to them? I've got the books here of people who are 10 times greater than them. I've got Rashi, I've got Tosfot, I've got the Shulchan Aruch. Why should I be listening to a guy who's a contemporary of mine? And then I personally doubt the story actually happened, but it makes you understand who Rav Kook was. He was learning, I believe it was a Rashi in Baba Batra, or Rashbam in Baba Batra. And he got stuck, he didn't understand what it means. So the Netziv was walking by, so he asked the Netziv to explain the Rashbam, or Rashi, or whatever it was. So the Netziv, right, the older scholar in the yeshiva explains it to him. Then he asked a question, right, an obvious question which arouses from learning this. And the Netziv, so the Netziv, the older scholar told him, for 3 nights I didn't sleep trying to figure this out, and I still don't understand it. And then he gained a lot of respect for the rabbi for not making a faulty answer if he didn't have one, and he started attending the classes of the Netziv. That's when he started attending, not because he gave a good answer, but because he had the humility to say, I don't have a good answer for you. And then he became the student of the Netziv. So about Heter Mechira, Rav Kook quotes the Netziv, and he says the Netziv rejected this option, but actually I'm not so sure if he was right. Now, Rav Kook defends this position and says, actually, the Netziv pushed it off, but his original suggestion might have been right. Maybe today, maybe today the Muslims are ger toshavs. Why would today Muslims be ger toshavs? So he gives an explanation as follows. He says, we need 3 people to accept upon yourself someone. You need a bet din to accept a conversion. The bet din creates the conversions. For someone to become a ger toshav, a resident stranger, you don't need a bet din to create a conversion. What you need is a person to accept upon himself the 7 Noahide laws, and you need the Jews to know this. You need us to be aware of the fact that he accepted upon himself the 7 Noahide laws. If we don't know that he accepted the 7 Noahide laws, it's very good that he himself accepts them. It could be that between him and God, he is a ger toshav, but we wouldn't treat him as such because we don't know. So you need 3 people. 3 people tell their friends, and it becomes popular knowledge, like anything you need a court for. But if an entire nation accepts upon themselves the 7 Noahide laws, let's say Muslims, all Muslims have accepted the 7 Noahide laws, there's no real need in 3 people. Right? This is 10 times better than 3 people accepting in front of 3 people. This is the entire nation. If all Muslims accept the 7 Noahide laws, it's almost pointless for him to go in front of another 3 people and say, hey, I would like to accept upon myself the Noahide laws. Following this, the assumption is being made, number 1, all Muslims keep the 7 Noahide laws. Assumption number 2 is, you don't need 3 people to accept it, as long as you've got a full nation. And again, as mentioned earlier, according to the Ravad, you couldn't have a ger toshav today, even if there's no jubilee. It's just that we won't accept them. But the main issue, Rav Kook said, all this aside, I'm not so sure if the Netziv was right. Maybe Muslims are ger toshavs. The Ravad said you could have a ger toshav today, we just don't accept them, because all the laws don't apply anymore. We don't have the right to decide who lives and who doesn't live in Israel. We're not in charge, right? We don't have lands in the corners of the field we're giving away to the poor. So there's no point in accepting them. We don't accept a ger toshav today. But if they become a ger toshav, I saw in Israel there's a Rabbi Zaloti. He was very famous in the case of Rav Goren, I'm going a bit off topic here. There's a story with a mamzer. It's called Ha'ach v'Ha'achot. What happened is a person from Europe got married in Europe and ended up moving to Israel. It was a forced marriage. She didn't want to get married. She was 12, he was 13 at the time, and he kidnapped her, and they went to another place. He claims that he converted. She claims he never converted. Now, there's no way to verify this because the Holocaust happened. There's no way to verify whether or not he actually converted. She claims he never converted. She claims it was never a kosher marriage to begin with, and she got remarried in Israel, Orthodox marriage. Now, her kids wanted to get married, and the problem was the husband, since then, has also moved to Israel, claiming he's Jewish, and he claims that always was Jewish. He was a very bad Jew. He couldn't even sing L'chadodi. The court, if you read a lot of the Rabbanut discussions about this from Rabbi Gore, he writes that he himself couldn't. They asked him to recite L'chadodi. He couldn't finish off L'chadodi. What kind of a Jew can't say L'chadodi? He can't sing the. Anyways, and he couldn't finish Shema Yisrael. He finished it wrong. Instead of Echad, he said something else. But if he converted, he converted. All of this is irrelevant. So at the time, the Rabbanut, 2-1, it kept going up until it reached the High Court, and it was a 2-1 decision. Two of them decided that she was married to the original guy, and therefore the child from second marriage cannot get married in Israel, and you'd have to go to Switzerland or something to get married. And the one rabbi decided that the first marriage was not a marriage because it was not a kosher conversion. We cannot trust if he ever converted, and therefore the second marriage is valid, and if the kids are not mamzerim, they can get married. And Rabbi Zalotti was one of the very big opposers to this story. Rabbi Goren said, afterwards later decided, anyways, let's veto the Rabbanut's decision. Rabbi Goren decided to veto the Rabbanut's decision. Rabbi Zalotti was very upset about this. Rabbi Zalotti wrote a very long response arguing with this. So that's what made him very, very famous. And he wrote a very long thing about this. Rabbi Zalotti also has Mishnat Yabat, which is a very, very great book and writes a lot of things in length. And he makes this following argument. Let's say you've got a guy who's a ger toshav. Yeah, he's a bona fide ger toshav. And then the Jubilee stops. The Jews get kicked out of Israel. Does he cease to be a ger toshav? Does his status change? It makes no sense. How does an individual status change from a ger toshav to not? So obviously, says Rabbi Zalotti, obviously a person can be a ger toshav whether or not we accept them to be a ger toshav. When we accept them to be a ger toshav, that's only on how we'll treat them. And once we accept them as a ger toshav, we accept them as a ger toshav, that's what they are. Today, we don't accept them anymore. That being said, if someone is a ger toshav, he's a ger toshav. If we know he's a ger toshav, we know he's a ger toshav. So if an entire nation keep the Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, we don't need to accept them. If today you could have a ger toshav, we don't need to accept them. We know they're ger toshavs. So Rabbi Kook made the possibility that maybe actually all the Muslims are ger toshavs, so you could sell them land in Israel. Now, there's a debate amongst the students whether or not he meant this as independently a strong argument, or he meant this as an argument alongside his other arguments for Heter Mechira. But the first chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Herzog, he decided to apply this as the state of Israel's position regarding non-Jews. Now, when Israel was established, I mentioned this last week also, the Zionist rabbis wanted to make a religious state, which I mentioned earlier last week. I don't support the idea of a religious state. But the rabbis who did want to make a religious state had to deal with this problem. We can't have segregation. We can't have racism towards the minority non-Jews in Israel if we want a healthy, functioning state. If we want an ethical state. They also believe that this can't be the Torah position. Torah is an ethical country. This can't be the Torah's position. So a lot of them had different positions to argue for it. And I mentioned last week Margoliot, Reuven Margoliot accepted this position. Even before there were rabbis who have made this argument for this position. But Rabbi Herzog was the first one who really made this the state of Israel's position. And today I think a lot of rabbis have actually adapted to this position. As mentioned earlier, the two fundamental criteria are that they keep the 7 Noahide laws and the fact that the entire nation does so and this person belongs to that nation. So do Muslims and Christians keep the 7 Noahide laws? So I mentioned last week that besides for Rav Aviner, it's almost unanimous that the Muslims do. There are certain technical issues, like for example, let's say if they eat crabs, which are fried alive. I don't know if they do, they probably don't, right? So they violate Ever Min HaChai, but in principle they accept the idea that we should be kind to animals. So if you'll find me Muslims who violate one of the technicalities in the law, that shouldn't be such an issue as long as they accept the premises of all of them. So as a whole, Christians are still Noahide keeping laws. The problem is idolatry, believing in more than one God. which is not a problem with Muslims. Again, as mentioned earlier last week, I believe I mentioned this, Rabbi Aviner believes Muslims don't fill the criteria because all Muslims are murderers. So he's a very far right-wing rabbi. I don't think anyone would agree with such a crazy statement. Most rabbis today believe, I saw Rabbi Melamed, he's also like a right-wing rabbi in Israel. He argued that besides for keeping 7 Noahide laws, you also have to support the state of Israel. And because the Muslims in Israel don't support the state of Israel, they don't qualify as a ger toshav. Besides for the fact that he made this up, I don't even think it's true. I think Muslims in Israel do support the states. In any case, most rabbis believe Muslims do fit the criteria. With Christians, it's more problematic for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, they believe in more than one God, would be claim number 1, which again we'll discuss today, they not, right? Issue number 2 with Christians would be, the Rambam writes, they have to accept it because God told Moses. And they don't accept it because God told Moses, they accept it because, Jesus told them, right? So they don't accept the divine revelation as the reason to keep the 7 Noahide laws, as opposed to Muslims who do.